Welcome, everyone, to the final onpoli podcast for the season. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, the province reveals more of its design plans for Ontario Place, and we'll have the details.
Blistering temperatures this week have the government and school boards pointing fingers.
Internal documents show Doug Ford's target to build 1.5 million homes by the year 2031 could actually be much higher.
And Your Column, My Column looks at a legal battle brewing between Queen's Park and Toronto.
And I've got a column up on the events of 40 years ago yesterday, when the first Liberal Premier in more than 4 decades was sworn into office. If you don't remember who that was, well, here's a hint right here.
It's Friday, June 27th, 2025, so let's get to it one more time.
Little sugar to start out, as we always do.
Yes,
Hey,
good to see you.
JMM, I notice you've got your
It's the X-Wing targeting computer shirt.
X-Wing targeting computer.
Yes.
Those were the words I was looking for.
Because, there's been some things happening here at TVO, some endings, some new beginnings, and I thought to remember that you and I will be staying on target. The podcast is going to continue. We are going to keep delivering the podcast of whatever quality people think we deliver, and we are gonna keep doing what we do.
The actual title for episode 4 of Star Wars is
A New Hope.
A New Hope. And that's what we are. We are a new hope for this province of Ontario.
I do have one other thing.
Yeah.
As part of the occasions we've been marking, you kindly invited a bunch of people to your house this week. One of our colleagues pointed out something that I have to ask you about. You have a signed check from William Grenville Davis for the sum of $1 in your house. And I have to ask, is this a scandal we need to prepare for? Have you accepted the world's worst bribe?
Well, given the fact that the check is framed and never was cashed, no money actually changed hands. That was a bet Mr. Davis and I made. Oh my gosh, it's got to be 20 years ago. I, of course, took the Ticats. He took his beloved Argonauts. And the Ticats won that game. So we bet a loonie on it. And instead of sending me the loonie, he sent me a check for $1, which he signed. And of course, I wasn't going to cash the check for $1. So I framed it, kept it, and it's a lovely keepsake.
It was very nice. And we made a few jokes about, of course, this was the kind of thing you would keep.
Yes, indeed. Now, as you can see from the T-shirt I'm wearing today,
Yes.
Now, you know what? I'm not going to talk about David Peterson right now because I wrote the column this week about the events of 40 years ago yesterday. So I'll come back to him then. But this is the guy I'm going to talk about later in the program.
Okay.
All right. And with that, off to issue 1. The province has released some images of what they want Ontario Place to look like when it reopens. Let's scan through some of the images here. Okay, we're going through these here. First, for those listening on podcast, I'm going to describe what we're seeing. This is a map of the area. Next is the Therme Spa, which of course has not been the slightest bit controversial and is everybody's looking forward to seeing built. And then we have the new parking structure, which apparently will not be underwater as originally conceived. You see the Ontario Place, the familiar blue logo and Ontario Place font. The province was mum on when all this would be open to the public. So JMM, maybe some more deets here if we could.
Right. So let's go back to that parking structure. That is going to be located on site. There had been some speculation that the province and the City of Toronto might hash out a deal to locate the parking at Exhibition Place, which is just north of Lakeshore Drive. The cost of the parking structure is going to be estimated at $400 million.
Say that again?
$400 million.
$400 million.
For the parking structure. It will be 5 stories tall, larger than originally envisioned, and as you mentioned, above ground, not below the water table. And, it's again, for people who are listening on audio, it kind of looks like what you would expect a large parking structure to look like. It's a big box that's going to be filled with cars.
Although, do you like the facade?
Insofar as,
looks nice.
Yeah, a facade can help a parking structure. It's still going to be a parking structure.
Yeah. It's a parking structure with a nice facade.
Yes.
And I like seeing those old, blue Ontario Place lettering with the familiar font.
I did like that touch. I will say I like that they kept the style of the original sign.
Yeah.
Of course, on the flip side, I suspect a lot. Aside from the fact that the Ontario Place redevelopment is very, very controversial among the waterfront activists in this city, I suspect that the addition of a 5-story parking garage is not going to assuage anybody's skepticism of that project. But why are they doing it above ground? because of costs, right? If you could engineer a parking structure that would go below the water line, it would be very expensive. It's within the realm of possibility of technology in 2025, but it would just have been very, very expensive. So this is clearly a case where they have decided to trim some costs. The parking structure really continued to be one of the most controversial aspects of this redevelopment. Part of the lease that the government signed with Therme promises the 1,600 parking spaces in this structure for the spa's customers to be able to use. The province was required to meet that obligation in the lease if they had not had those parking spaces available. They were potentially open to $8,000 a day fines for not meeting this obligation to the spa operator.
Okay, these next comments are not meant as a criticism, just sort of a genuine inquiry here. The parking lots at Exhibition Place are not used that much during the course of the year.
Yes.
They're, of course, used during the 20-day fair, which ends at Labor Day.
Yes.
There are events, of course, at the X there during the course of the season, I guess 9 Argo football games and so on. But for the main, they aren't used very much, and I thought the idea was to get some use out of them here as it related to Ontario Place. But that's not happening now.
It seems not. The city is pretty protective about Exhibition Place. It owns Exhibition Place, where the province owns Ontario Place. As we mentioned, I mean, there are the 2-3 weeks in August where the CNE is there, and the city absolutely does not want to interrupt that more than a century-long fair. It also, there are other city assets. You mentioned the Argos games at BMO Field, the convention center, the Enercare Center. The city is pretty protective about making sure that those assets are not disrupted. The city also makes a bit of money off of Exhibition Place, whereas the province has sunk a ton of money into Ontario Place. And so I think the city is also nervous about anything that could disrupt their finances there. So a lot of issues. It is not as simple as it might appear. And there was also a question of the distance to the spa from the parking.
From Exhibition Place.
Yeah, and because one of the issues that was stipulated in the contract, and I think I remember this correctly, was that the parking had to be within, I think it was 650 meters or something like that of the spa. And the parking on the north side of Lakeshore Drive would have been out of that range, I think. And also, if you've ever had to walk that distance, December, January, February, it's pretty cold and pretty windy.
It's a haul, yeah. You got to go over the bridge. And, if you've ever gone down to the Bud stage for a show or something like that, and you park at the X, it's a half-hour walk from the parking lot to the Bud stage, particularly if there's a lot of people there. Okay, you remember off the top here, we scanned through some of the images of what the plans are for Ontario Place. And I don't know. I mean, the pictures did go by pretty quickly, so I didn't get that fabulous a look. But I don't recall seeing anything about a science center in any of those images.
Yes, indeed. So, of course, when the government of Ontario shut down the science center, was that last year? The promise was that a new science center would be opened at Ontario Place. And again, this has already been a controversial move because the province has all but confirmed it will not be opening a science center of the same scale as the shuttered one. But the renderings that the government provided do not show a science center, at least in the initial drawings. They did confirm that the government still intends to bring the science center there. They just haven't started that process. Minister of Infrastructure Kinga Surma said the province will be opening a bidding process in the search for a builder for the new science center in the fall. No real confident date as to when the new science center would open.
How about for the whole thing? Any sense of what target they're looking at?
Again, nothing formal. I think if you're the government of Ontario these days, putting an actual number to a construction project is sort of like a hostage to fortune. But potentially, of course, construction could go beyond the current mandate of this government. Minister Surma did say that Therme is able to start building the spa in the spring of next year, spring of 2026. The Premier did aver that he would love to see the revamped Ontario Place open by 2029, not incidentally right around the time that they are going to be running for re-election, if they adhere to the current fixed election date.
I was going to say, unless they go sooner.
Yes,
which has been known to happen.
But, I don't want to lead us down a whole other digression, but like even projects that have all of the political support in the world can go off the rails. And I use that phrase advisedly. We also learned this week that the Scarborough subway is behind schedule and is now going to cost about 10 times what it was originally estimated to. It's going to cost $10 billion.
Deep exhale.
Yes. Calm blue ocean. Okay. Serenity now.
Okay. Shall we move on?
Let's move on.
Off to issue 2. Well, has it been hot enough for you in the province of Ontario over the past week? We have seen the humidex skyrocket to more than 40 degrees Celsius. Thankfully, it looks as if we're going to get a little relief ahead of the Canada Day long weekend. So we got some mail on this week, didn't we?
We did indeed. We've got an email from listener Tim Moffat in Lindsay, who asks, "Hi, Steve and JMM. I live in Lindsay, Ontario, and I have a question about the weather and our school system. My son's classroom today was 30 degrees Celsius before the humidex. It's an old school that was not built with modern HVAC in mind, so I know the cost to retrofit the building with central air would be insane. But you can buy a DIY-ready mini-split heat pump from Costco for less than $2,000. I know that installing a heat pump in every classroom in the province is a very big number, and that's why it hasn't been done. But why can't individual schools do targeted fundraising? Why can't we have bake sales to raise the money or targeted one-time municipal taxes? Why must we force our teachers and children to work in unbearable heat waves when we can make other choices? Thank you, Tim Moffat."
Okay, good question, Tim. What's the answer?
Well, as with so many questions in public life, there's no single answer. One big problem is that the province and school boards can't seem to agree on who's actually responsible for finding the money. The province says that it is the responsibility of boards to ensure heating and cooling is available, and that they provide boards with $1.4 billion annually for improvements. Meanwhile, boards say that isn't enough money. Ontario schools as a whole have a repair backlog of $17 billion, billion with a B. I think for a lot of parents, this kind of finger pointing is frustrating because, when your kids come home hot, sweaty, tired, cranky probably from that kind of heat, I don't doubt that, I'll just testify personally. As a parent, it is frustrating.
I was just going to ask you, do you know this from experience personally?
Yes. My kid's school also does not have modern HVAC, and, the school is doing what they can, and mercifully, the heat here in Toronto seems to have broken, but yeah, it's tough, right? I can understand why somebody like Tim would think about, wanting to find a DIY solution.
Is Tim right in as much as it would be beyond the powers or financial abilities of all individual schools to just simply go out and buy their own?
If we look at the Trillium Lakelands District School Board, which is the secular public school board for Lindsay, Ontario, they have 53 schools in that school board. So let's say one heat pump by however many classrooms there are in 53 schools, but I'm guessing you very quickly get into, certainly hundreds, if not more than 1,000, depending on the collective bargaining agreements with the school boards. They may or may not have to use unionized labor to install this kind of equipment. I can't imagine that Costco's bulk prices are competitive enough to make that affordable. So I mentioned earlier that my kid's school is finding creative ways to deal with the heat. Schools have cooling centers in libraries and gyms where if you can't have AC in the entire school, at least you can make one room where it's cooler. I've seen the kids at school all carrying spray bottles now, and they're just spritzing themselves during recess. Obviously, in an ideal world, the province could spend the money to get these HVAC upgrades into every school in the province, but that is not a cost that this government is willing to shell out for. School boards themselves really are financially strapped in a lot of ways. One thing I will remind our audience about is that during COVID, one of the things that the province did to help school boards paper over some financial distress was that they were allowed to draw down reserves that had been socked away for building upgrades. Those reserves have not, as far as I'm aware, they have not been topped up again. So the school boards really are, school boards relative to the province are just always more financially distressed. And even if the money were not the issue, there is actually a physical question about whether the schools actually have the electrical capacity to put window AC units in every room, for example, right? Like certainly in older apartment buildings here in Toronto, landlords are able to forbid tenants from installing window AC units in some cases because the electrical capacity of the building cannot handle every tenant being able plugging in a new AC unit. The same is true of older schools. TDSB has talked about this, where it's not just we can't put the AC unit in the window. It's literally like if we try to plug that AC unit, it's going to trip all the breakers in the school. So it is frustrating. It is absolutely a question of money, and it is also a question of political will. It is also a question of physical reality, which is even less pliable than money or political will.
Well, physics has a way of asserting itself at the end of the day.
Unfortunately.
Well,
yes.
and this would presumably cause a great deal more electricity generation to take place as well. And of course, we get 60% of our electricity generation in this province from nuclear energy. You got an update on that?
I do. This one is a bit out of left field, but I wanted to alert our audience to it. So Ontario's electricity use is going to spike over the next 50 years. This is the provincial government's projection. The province has invested in new nuclear facilities. They have started the construction of the Darlington small modular reactors. We've talked about a bunch on this podcast. But a neighboring jurisdiction has also expressed some interest in nuclear power. New York State Governor Kathy Hochul has announced this week that New York will be looking at least 1,000 megawatts of nuclear power in the form of what she called advanced nuclear power. Still super vague, super early in this process, but it's the kind of language that you would use to describe those small modular reactors that Ontario is already building at Darlington. Folks will remember that, I've expressed some skepticism or some reservations about the SMRs in particular, but the government's pitch has been that this is a new form of nuclear power that Ontario can sort of get in on the ground floor of a potential export market, not just within Canada, but potentially globally and internationally as well. And this announcement from New York State is the kind of thing that might turn into one of these cases where, Ontario skills, Ontario expertise could end up helping build new nuclear power in New York State. As I say, very early on, but worth keeping an eye on, and I will be keeping an eye on this as we go forward.
I have no doubt about that.
Yes.
And with that, on to issue 3. The provincial government has long touted its goal of building 1.5 million homes by the year 2031, but internal documents obtained by the CBC say the target could actually be much higher. Okay, what do the documents say?
Right. So the CBC did a Freedom of Information request and discovered that briefing materials sent to Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing Rob Flack suggested that Ontario's housing need could be as high as 2.1 million homes by 2031. I don't know if this is obvious to our audience, but Minister Flack is a new Minister of Housing. He got the job after the last election, and when a new minister is brought into a file, the role of the civil service is to produce like a briefing binder of like, hey, you know nothing about housing and municipal affairs. We're going to teach you about that. Here's like your crash course on it. And so this is the kind of binder that the CBC would have gotten access to through their Freedom of Information request. And so the Ontario Public Service is projecting that housing starts are half of what they would need to be to reach the 1.5 million target. And also, the 1.5 million target is also out of date because we probably need something more like 2.1 million.
And what's the government got to say about all of this?
Well, the CBC noted that at the press conference to announce Bill 17, which I'm going to talk about later as well, but Bill 17 was the Protect Ontario by Building Faster and Smarter Act. Flack did not mention...
Which part of that do you object to more? The Protecting Ontario, which is in every single thing that this government does, or the Building Faster and Smarter part?
I don't have to choose. When they introduced that bill, Minister Flack did not mention the 1.5 million homes target. Only when he was asked about it did he say it was still a goal. If you do some searching online, with regards to that 1.5 million number, the government's press releases and other documents usually say that they're now aiming for at least 1.5 million new homes. So the government understands that this is a bare minimum at this point. I will add, though, that the government has stopped updating the website that they were publishing of tracking housing starts by Ontario municipalities. I believe the last time it was updated was the fall of 2024. It had stopped being updated in the winter because the government said, oh, well, it's the caretaker convention. It's the period during the election where the government, the civil service can't do anything. The government did not, in fact, scrupulously adhere to the caretaker convention during the election campaign, something we talked about on this podcast. But in any case, they have not been updating that tracker. It has not stopped the government from going around and handing out massive novelty checks to cities like Toronto. But we don't have that data in a publicly accessible form. So we kind of, it's not exactly that we're taking the government on faith that these numbers are right, but yeah.
I get you, but if it's 1.5 million or 2.1 million, does it matter given that the government's not going to reach either target either way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is no at this point. The target itself does not matter. At current rates, we are not going to hit the 1.5 million target. And the spring budget, for example, showed that housing construction is going to get worse before it gets better, if I could put it that way. Like, housing starts are going to continue to decline in the government's projections. Now, I should always say, out of fairness here, that the finance ministry is basically doing projections based on consensus estimates of private market actors, whereas the housing ministry, like the municipal affairs and housing, is going to they're going to pick different targets for their own reasons. It's not necessarily a matter of hypocrisy, but it is just the fact that the finance ministry does not think that the province is going to meet its housing targets right now. Why does this matter? Because the government's own logic, ever since 2018, since they first won power, the government has said, the reason for the housing crisis is that it is a housing shortage. We do not have enough homes. We need to build more homes. For at least their first term, they did a lot of policy that was trying to reform planning processes, get more homes built. Those were not hugely effective given, just based on where we are now with housing starts. They have not been super aggressive on this file really since the 2022 election, except for the Greenbelt fiasco. And so now we have a situation where, frankly, the biggest relief on housing prices at the moment is coming because of the immigration cuts that the federal government has made. We have seen rents start to decline in the city of Toronto, but I don't really know of anyone who thinks that Ontario is on the right track in terms of housing policy right now.
And with that, let's get off to your column, my column. Okay, you know this feature. We call it Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I have a little chat about the columns we wrote for our website, tvo.org, over the past week. Start us off, if you would.
So I am going to talk a bit more about Bill 17, and it has sparked a bit of a legal dispute between the City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario. Talked about this before on the podcast, but very briefly, one of the things that Bill 17 did was, or at least one of the things the government said it did, was remove the ability of the City of Toronto to impose a green building standard on new construction, right? Things like better windows, dedicated parking for EV charging, that kind of thing. The province stepped in and said, no, cities cannot make any requirements that are not in the provincial building code, and anything else is invalid. The city says that, if I could put it this way, the province tried to kill the Toronto Green Standard and missed. Basically, that the language in Bill 17 does not actually address the foundational legal power that the city is claiming to implement the Toronto Green Standard. Now, where I got irritated in this story and reporting this story out was that over multiple days, I asked the City of Toronto if it could point to me to where in either the City of Toronto Act or any other planning or provincial legislation what the legal authority for the Toronto Green Standard
you got
is.
nerdy with them, didn't you?
I did. They did not get nerdy in response, and so they did not provide an answer to me. So on the one hand, like, that does not inspire a ton of confidence in me that the city, in fact, knows what it's doing. Even if the city is correct here, the province is saying, cut the funny business. We are watching what you are doing, and if you try to continue imposing these building standards, we will take further legislative action. They said that explicitly in a letter from the deputy minister to the city manager. This is not a fight that the City of Toronto is going to win. I personally would love to see more ambitious building standards. I would love to see developers voluntarily, adopt greener building forms. This specific legal fight is not one that the city is going to win. And I praised Olivia Chow when she negotiated her New Deal for Toronto with Doug Ford, because she avoided a long, costly, drawn-out fight over Ontario Place that she was never going to win, right? Now, either city staff or I think, frankly, they are giving councillors bad advice, and they are setting themselves up for exactly the kind of fight that they avoided previously.
You know, the great political philosopher Kenny Rogers had a line about this, right?
I believe he did.
You gotta know when to hold, you got to know when to fold them. There we go.
And how about you?
Well, I want to get back to this guy,
Yes.
the guy who's on my T-shirt this week. David Robert Peterson was sworn in as Ontario's 20th Premier 40 years ago yesterday. And I want to talk a little bit about that because, of course, he was the first Liberal Premier in 42 years. There was a 42-year-long Tory dynasty. David Peterson was the first Liberal to come along and end that dynasty. And there is a great story, really, I think, about the swearing in, about the events of 40 years ago yesterday. There was a big stage that had been created in front of Queen's Park in anticipation of the Canada Day festivities on July the 1st. And apparently, the story goes, when David Peterson saw that stage, he said, why don't we have the swearing in outdoors? And this was a heretical idea. This had never been done before. Government swearings in, I guess, had always taken place indoors, relatively small crowd, the public not particularly invited to take part. Yes. But Mr. Peterson's idea was, we're going to do it outdoors. Let's do it at noon. Everybody who's working in the neighborhood, and there's certainly thousands of civil servants who work in the neighborhood of Queen's Park, can come and watch this historic event take place. A lot of people thought, are you nuts? It's going to rain. Are you nuts? No one's going to show up. But guess what? It was a gorgeous day. Thousands of people showed up, and it was really, I was there too, covering it for, who was I covering it for? CBC at the time? Maybe CBC, maybe CHFI. I don't even remember now. Isn't that crazy? Anyways, must have been CBC. That was an historic day for the province of Ontario. One of the nicest moments in the swearing in was when Mr. Peterson had his treasurer, whom we now call the Minister of Finance, sworn in. His name was Robert Nixon. I've talked about him here before. He will turn 97 years old next month. Mr. Nixon, as he took the oath, no doubt was thinking of his father, Harry Nixon, who was the last Liberal Premier before 42 straight years of Tories. Yeah. So there was a kind of a nice symmetry there as well. David Peterson got up to the microphones and he said, I want to introduce to you, people of Ontario, a new government. And his line was, without walls or barriers. And then he said, please come into Queen's Park. It's your building. Have a look around. Yeah. So many people took him up on it that we later learned after the fact they were terrified, officials were, that the building was going to collapse. Literally, there had never been so many people, so much foot traffic on the second floor of that building, and they were fearful that something was going to, a catastrophe was going to happen.
It's an old building.
It's a very old building. It's more than 100 years old, right? So, fortunately, nothing bad did happen. There was also this crazy moment where the first Liberal cabinet is meeting, and all the new ministers are gathering in the cabinet room, which they've never been in before. Of course, this is their first time. And as they look around the room, there is a nice woman sitting in the corner of the cabinet office. And some of the Liberals are going up to the civil service and saying, is she with you? And the civil servants are looking at the Liberals and say, well, she's not one of ours. Is she one of yours? Finally, somebody goes up to her and says, ma'am, what are you doing here? And she's a nice old lady, said, well, the Premier said we were allowed to come in and just sort of check things out, so I thought I'd come in and check this out. I don't think she understood that Apparently, that invitation did not extend to the secret confidential deliberations of the Executive Council.
Yeah.
So that did not happen. She was escorted out. Nicely, of course.
Yes.
Last week, in downtown Toronto, about 200 Liberals gathered to reminisce and celebrate the event, just in a kind of a way we talked about 3 weeks earlier when a bunch of common sense revolutionaries gathered in downtown Toronto to remember the 30th anniversary of Mike Harris's win. And we've got some pictures here. Let's bring up some of the shots. There's David Peterson on the right, leaning over talking to Sean Conway, who was his Minister of Education, who was responsible for bringing in the very controversial full funding for separate schools bill. People won't remember this, but back in the day, the province of Ontario only funded Catholic schools to grade 10. And if you wanted to continue in grades 11, 12, and 13, as we had back in the day, you had to pay tuition. Well, the Liberals governing, with the support of the New Democrats, brought in a bill, passed it into law. Sean Conway shepherded it through the legislature. And now, of course, both the Catholic and secular systems are fully funded all the way to the end of high school. So there are those two again. There's David Peterson again with a big smile, enjoying the speeches that he's hearing from the group. There are the two people on the left that I want to bring your attention to there, Vince Borg and Herschel Ezrin. The two on the left, they were David Peterson's chiefs of staff and very influential, obviously, in this nascent government. Herschel Ezrin, the guy in the middle, particularly, was considered really quite an essential element to Peterson's success in the first couple of years. A really smart guy and with his hand on the tiller. Okay, we got a bunch of pictures here of some of this cast of characters from 1985 to 1990. I'm going to see if I can remember here. Front row, Frank McClash, Ron Cantor, Charles Beer, Bob Wong. Bob Wong, first ever Chinese-Canadian cabinet minister in Ontario history. And then I think we got Alvin Curling in the top there, top left. Alvin Curling, the first ever black cabinet minister in Ontario history. Ken Keyes, Jerry Phillips, Murad Velshi. You might know his kid, Ali Velshi, who's on MSNBC. Murad Velshi was the MPP for Don Mills, and then there's David Peterson with his head turned. Okay, that's that group there. There's Greg Sorbera in the middle. He was sworn in yesterday, 40 years ago. Murray Elston on the right. Murray Elston's name is one you might want to remember because during the course of the first Peterson term, they tried to outlaw extra billing against doctors. This is, doctors, when they provide a service, they get a fee that is provided for on the OHIP fee schedule. Some doctors were charging directly to patients beyond that. And the government of the day said, this is a threat to Medicare, and we're going to outlaw this. We're going to ban extra billing. Murray Elston was the guy who had to face down thousands of doctors in their white lab coats who came to Queen's Park and protested on the South Lawn at Queen's Park, and the government eventually did get that through. And I think, if I recall, there was Diane Poole, who was another MPP on the other side of that shot. And there's the wide shot. That's many of the ex-MPPs from the Peterson years, 1985 to 1990. John Michael, they also put up some slides on the screen behind them of the MPPs who are no longer with us. And I was kind of shocked to see how many names were on the list. There have been dozens and dozens of people from that time who are no longer with us. And it just is a great reminder of how time marches on. It really does. Yeah. They are, just as the Harris people put together a kind of a website and a book dealing with the Harris years, these folks are going to do the same thing, a website and a book called the Peterson Years. And I think there's a website right now, the petersonyears.com or .ca or something like that. People can look to that. I think it's just hot as of now. And indulge me for a second here. I want to do one more thing here. Let me just get up here so you can see this shirt. This is a copy of the portrait that is at Queen's Park showing David Peterson. And what was so unusual about this portrait is that, look at it. This is a guy with no jacket on and an open neck tie. And that had never been done before with a portrait of any premier in Ontario history. They're all very sober, serious-looking pictures of all men at this point in suits. And David Peterson was known as kind of a very casual guy who used to wear his tie loosened around his collared shirt. And so he had his official portrait made looking very casual. And he also did something different. Sheldon, can we come in for another close-up shot on this? Because I want to point out a few things in this portrait. And that is, he introduced some other things in the picture, pictures of his family in the background, books that had relevance to him. it was just a very different look for an official portrait of a premier. And anyway, David Peterson was the first guy to do that, and he's still around. He's 81 years old, very influential in a wide variety of activities across the city, including at the Toronto Star, where I'm trying to remember now, is he chair of the board or vice chair of the board? Something like that.
I lost track.
Anyway, there's David Peterson, the 20th premier of the province, and it all happened 40 years ago, yesterday.
All right, shall we go to the mailbag?
Let's do it. If you've got a burning question or an insightful comment, please send it to us at onpolitics@tvo.org. Start us off, JMM.
Right, so we have an email here from Michael Scott in Toronto who writes, Dear Mrs. Paikin and McGrath, on your recent podcast, you noted the rarity of premiers representing ridings in the city of Toronto. However, in addition to premiers Ray, Wynne, and Ford, you omitted two other examples. George Stuart Henry represented the riding of York East when he served as Ontario's 10th premier from 1930 to 34. While this riding excluded the historic city of Toronto, it included several municipalities that are now part of the modern city of Toronto, for example, Scarborough and Yorkville, in addition to parts of modern York region. And of course, George Drew, the first premier in the provincial Tory dynasty, represented the riding of High Park from 1943 to 1948. Best regards, Michael Scott, Toronto, Ontario.
Okay, this is why I love our viewers.
Yes.
Our viewers are smart.
Yes.
And when we screw up, they point it out.
Yes.
And you know what? I am mortified that I forgot these two. And now, in fairness, it's before either one of us was born. It's not very often I can say on this program, this was actually even before I was born, but there you go. Particularly egregious is the fact that I forgot George Henry, and I'll tell you why. George Henry, as a kid, used to spend his summers on Manitoulin Island.
Oh, my gosh.
Because his father and father and uncle, they both had a business there. The Henry brothers had a mill there, so he would go up and he would spend his summers on Manitoulin Island. And in fact,
Are they going to take your privileges away?
You should. That's appalling. I forgot that. Actually, one of the big streets to the extent there are big streets in Kagawong, Ontario, population 100, there's a Henry Drive right in Kagawong. And how I forgot George Henry, I will never know. George Drew, again, how did I forget George Drew? High Park, West End of Toronto, was his riding. He is one of the very few premiers in Ontario history who actually lost his seat running an election. And what's crazier, his party, the PCs, won the election, but he lost his seat. And he lost his seat because he tried to, if you can imagine, he tried to kind of liberalize alcohol sales in the province of Ontario. And there was a temperance advocate named William Temple, who ran for the CCF. This is the party before the NDP, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. He ran for the CCF as a kind of an anti-temperance guy, and he defeated George Drew, the premier, in the premier's own riding. So, booze has been controversial for more than just the last few years.
It has been part of provincial public policy for a very long time.
There you go. This is back in the 40s that this happened. So anyway, yes, we add to the list of Doug Ford and Kathleen Wynne,
and Bob Ray.
And Bob Ray, who technically is born in Ottawa, but he had a Toronto riding.
Yep.
We add the names George Henry and George Drew. And Mr. Henry is actually buried 20 minutes from this studio. I go visit him all the time. So
we'll
Premier
make
Henry,
some kind of sacrifice on an altar too.
Premier Henry, I will never forget you again. I'm so sorry.
Again, if you'd like to ask about content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
There we go. And that is the onpoli podcast for this Friday, June 27th, 2025, our final podcast edition for this, our, I think, 5th season, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
5th season, okay.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available, and you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Please write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org, and be sure to include your first and last name and where you're located.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lauren Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
I know I say this every week, but particularly on this last episode, I want it known that we are truly grateful to the crew that sets up our studio here. All the folks in the control room, thank you so much. It's great. Tina's over here shooting you. Chad's over here shooting me. We are delighted to be working with such a fabulous team of professionals here. Now, we're going on a bit of a hiatus during July, but we will be attending the annual conference of AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, in Ottawa in August. We're going to do a show there, and then we'll be back in the fall with our 6th season of onpoli in your podcast feeds on audio and on TV and YouTube on Friday nights. So until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.